What do you mean you don't have hot sauce? This is Texas. We put Tabasco on cornflakes. You can play it safe if you want to, but you got to risk it to get that biscuit. When it comes to business, you got to look out for the cookout. That's how we do it in Texas. What do you mean my accent is too southern? Well, we're fixing to get it on Solve for X. Welcome to Solve for X, the podcast where curiosity meets collaboration. I'm Dr. Rick Fernandez, your host on this journey into the heart of education and innovation. Welcome back to another episode of Solve for X. I'm your host, Rick Fernandez, and we're solving K-12's most difficult problems. I'm here with a very special guest, former superintendent, Guilford County, San Diego Unified, and of course, the one, the only Houston ISD, Dr. Terry Grier. Dr. Grier, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rick, it's so good to see you, and it's good to be on.
Yeah, I've been wanting to have you on for quite some time. And before we jump into the work you're doing with Educentric, could you just give a little brief overview of your career as an educator? I know I hit some high notes there, but a little bit more detail if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm like most of us in leadership positions or formerly in leadership positions. I started out as a teacher, and I taught, a lot of different subjects, but primarily health education and biology. I worked as a principal of some 12 schools in North Carolina. That's home. That's where I grew up. Went to East Carolina University as an undergraduate student and have several masters and an educational specialist degree from there. But from the teaching ranks, coached baseball, high school football, a little bit of JV basketball, went that kind of route like a lot of people do. And from there, became an assistant principal and then a principal of a 712 school, and then another 712 school, and went into central office administration very early on, very young, as an assistant superintendent. Never will forget interviewing for the job. I went into, it was in Weston, North Carolina, and I thought it was another country because I grew up on a tobacco farm in eastern North Carolina, or near a tobacco farm in eastern North Carolina. And when, we got all the way past Charlotte up to the edge of the mountains of North Carolina, I thought I'd move to another country. But interviewed with the superintendent, and I said, well, I see it's advertised as an assistant superintendent's position. Exactly, assistant superintendent for what? And he looked right at me and smiled. He said, well, what would you like for it to be? I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, you're going to be the assistant superintendent for HR. You're going to be the assistant superintendent for curriculum. You're going to be the assistant superintendent for support services or facilities. In other words, it was a superintendent, me. We had a special education director and a finance director. We had about 5,000 kids in the district. And so the small district like that, you really have to learn a lot of things because you're doing a lot of things. And I do think there's something to be said for starting out in a smaller district if you want to lead a larger district, because you aren't pigeonholed into one area. And so you have a little bit of knowledge about what happens here, what happens there. And from there, moved into a superintendency and worked in a number of states around the country. The last 3 jobs, as you said, were Guilford County in North Carolina, and then San Diego, and then Houston. And I'll tell you this real quick. We're in San Diego. When I went to Guilford County, we have 50,000 kids. And in 8 years, I'll say 8 years, and in that 8-year period, we grew to 75,000 kids. We had no Hispanic students when I went there. When I left, we had grown by about 10% Hispanic students. And we really had to figure out how to educate children from different backgrounds who didn't speak English as a first language. And it was very rewarding. And, after I left there, we 75,000 kids. I go to San Diego, 15, 20,000 kids. And I thought, this is not too different. God, it was like freaking fire hydrant. I mean, it was coming right and left. Never worked with unions that had hard bargaining power, to go on strike. That was an adjustment. I was there about a year and a half. I thought I'd retire there. I'd retired out of North Carolina. We liked San Diego. Houston kept calling. We kept saying not interested. They kept calling. We kept saying not interested. Finally convinced us to go talk. And the board offered me the job. And I got to Houston and we had 200,000 kids when I arrived. And again, I thought, well, coming from 125 to 200,000, piece of cake, fire hydrant all over again. Man, it was moving so fast and so hard. And the politics of Houston, the politics of no matter where you work as a superintendent, small, medium, or size, that's something they don't teach you in graduate school. But the politics, particularly the race politics in Houston, were quite fascinating.
So you hit on a little bit about what the difference is, but would you say that Houston was more of a transformational opportunity just because of the need, as opposed to San Diego, to Guilford? What was different about leading Houston?
Well, it's interesting. Guilford County was more transformational, and you had an opportunity to do some pretty creative things there because of the board. There's a board in Guilford. When I first went there, may have been the best school board I've ever worked for, and I worked with some good boards. But had a fabulous group of people. It was a large board of 11 people, but of those 11, 9 of them are the original board. I think 11 of them really wanted to see all kids learn and learn at high levels. And they were willing to allow leadership to introduce a change that would help make that possible. San Diego, 5-member board, um, I ran right into a buzzsaw there when I got there. Uh, the state was almost bankrupt. We had to cut over $200 million out of our budget, and that was tough. But we involved the board, we involved the teachers, we involved the business community, we made some and I do say we made some hard decisions. Balanced the budget, got along fine with the board. Teachers union was difficult, but we were trying to manage that best as we could. Um, I left San Diego with no hard feelings, but with a wonderful opportunity I felt in Houston. The original Houston board, back when I went there in 2009, you had a lot of reform-minded people that came right out of the old Rod Page camp that felt like public education had to change. It wasn't educating all children well. If you were affluent, particularly affluent and white, you were getting a heck of a good education almost anywhere. But if you were non-white or poor, that was not always the case. And that original board in Houston wanted a transformational leader, and that's what they stressed in the interview. And so that in and of itself allowed me to do some different things that a lot of folks were not doing. That Houston board, for example, wanted merit pay, and they wanted that was something they wanted to see, they demanded to see. And so we started a good program, I thought, and we were paying our highest performing teachers significantly a lot more money. I see the same kind of thing happening in Houston now. And it's been quite a while since 2009. But it's things go around, come around, and education has a way of doing that.
One of the things I'm most proud about at my time in Houston ISD was just the work, the level of work, the level of autonomy. Right, you had to learn a lot, but you were given a lot of rope to take chances, to do what you felt was best as a principal, and you were also given a lot of resources and coaching and feedback, and how much and how soon, and it was totally different than anything I had ever seen prior to coming to Houston. And that leads me to my next question about Educentric. Coaching principals, coaching cabinet level administrators across the country. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing through Educentric and some of the school districts you're working with around the country?
Well, Educentric's framework is is relatively new to some people in education. It's not new to the business world at all. It's really it's an adaptation of the North Star metric, Hushine North Star metric framework. It's very, very similar to some of the work we did in Houston, working with a lot of different people from in a lot of different colleges and universities. It's a process that branches of the military use, and I know LG Computers, Dell Computers, Motorola, uh, Airbnb, Netflix, they all have one measure that is the most important measure to the success of their organization. And Educentric's model basically comes into an individual school and works with a principal and a team of teachers, and we look at with them at their last year's lagging indicators of success, the results the state used to measure them, or the school board, or whomever. And we take a look at that, and then we survey parents and teachers, and we ask them what they think. It's a pretty generic survey. If you're already using one, we'll use your results. And we take all that information and we push it together into a current state analysis. This is where your school is right now. And it surprises me sometimes through a little 2-day workshop that looking at that data, a lot of teachers seem surprised and some quite startled by it. And principals all of a sudden are having to face reality. This is where we are. And in big organizations and small organizations, as a superintendent or central office administrator, you get focused on so many things and pulled in so many directions, politically and educationally, that word focused is a word that you think you understand, but you Madeline Hunter used to call it bird walking. You would bird walk over to one side, people drop birds to see a crumb over here. This reminds me of pigeons when you're in the park. They're bird walking over here and bird walking over there. Well, in education, we get distracted and it's very difficult to stay focused. So what we say to them, if you look at all this data, wow, if this is where you are today, where do you want to be in 3 years? And they come up with this is and we say dream, big aspirational goals, dream big time. And then from there, I always say, okay, if you want your graduation rate to be 94% and it's at 88%, or in some cases 69%, what are the biggest barriers keeping you from going from where you are to where you need to be? And then we work with them to put together really a two-page plan front and back to help move them from where they are to where they need to go. And then they have to develop what we call key performance indicators. It's a business term, but it's basically, again, old Madeline Hunter checking for understanding. What do you do every week, every 2 weeks to assess whether or not kids have learned what they need to learn, or that you have done what you need to do to move that graduation rate from 69 up to 93? Now, you're not going to get there in 1 year, but at Educentric, we tell people, if we don't get 7, 8, 10-point gains in a year, we've not done our job, you've not done yours. And in most school districts, you've been there, we work together in Houston. Superintendents will get 1-point, 2-point gains, and they'll start thumping their chest and jumping up and down and having parades and ice cream parties. And I mean, my goodness, it could have been a just standard deviation. You know this and I do. When nothing changes, nothing changes.
I can imagine that over your time in education, you've heard a lot of reasons why, right? Why can't we focus on this, or one thing that's impossible. I've got all these different variables I'm trying to deal with, and I hear a lot about, well, we've got to solve for the culture before the learning can happen. How do you push back on those, those kind of vague excuses or reasons of why we can't get to, look, at the end of the day, it's the bottom line: are kids learning or are they not? What would you say to some of the excuses out there?
You and I know it. We've heard it our whole careers. Excuse after excuse after excuse. And it really comes down to people's beliefs and values. Do they believe kids can learn at high levels? And I mean, when I say kids, students, do we believe all students can learn at high levels or higher levels? Your brightest kids are often the kids that are cheated the most in public education.
Yeah.
They are. They just, because they're so smart, we don't challenge them. And they're getting cheated out of an education. And you flip to the other end of the spectrum where you have your lowest performing kids, where kids can't read. And we know when kids can't read, they can't read. What are you doing differently? What are you doing? We know they can't read. We have little control over what happens in their homes. And in Houston, my gosh, we had kids from 112 countries that spoke over 85 languages as a first language in their home. So we can't, this stuff about, well, the parents don't do this, or there's drugs in the neighborhood or gangs. We know that. But what can you do differently inside the schoolhouse door? And you've heard me say this a dozen times. If your kids can't read, why are you teaching anything else? And why aren't you using reading strategies like science of reading that Louisiana and Mississippi and a lot of southern states have proven really help kids conquer this really tough nut of reading?
Yep. You would think that being in this age of AI and some of the different resources that not just schools but everybody has, I feel like we're seeing less innovation, not more, in across the country, not just in Houston. Do you think it's the political climate that's making people kind of tighten up and be risk averse, or what do you see in terms of opportunity for innovation, and why isn't it occurring maybe like it should be?
It's tough. That's a tough question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it. I look at it and I have, my own ideas about it. I think
Sure.
a lot of it, quite frankly, is governance. I don't have the solutions to school boards. But I know that I don't care how good a superintendent you are. I don't care how creative and innovative you are. I don't care how much research you know. I don't care how good a leader you are. If you have a school board that's more concerned about the length of the grass on the football field, what kind of tractors you're buying, than they are the percentage of kids that are reading on grade level, there's not a lot you can do. You can really try, but you can also get yourself fired. And I think that's one piece. I look at state departments of public education, and I know I live in a state where you can have less than 50% of your kids reading on grade level, and you can be rated a C or a B by the State Department of Public Instruction. They inflate grades across the country. A lot of times it depends on the year the governor is up for reelection. I could go into deep conspiracy theories about why some elected officials don't want to see poor kids and kids of colors learn at higher rates and higher levels. I mean, I could go on and on and on about it. But the real piece to me is that common sense just doesn't seem to be that common, not only in public education, but in the society we live in today. You can't keep doing the same things, the same ways, and get different results. You can't keep using lesson plans that were developed 15 years ago when you were a teacher and you're teaching material that's not aligned to the state standards to poor children and expect them to pass those exams. It's not going to happen. So the big question is, to me, is okay, where are we? Where do we want to go? What steps do we need to take to get us there? And what do we need to focus on?
Yeah.
Educentric, we focus on one measure. What is the most measure? What is the single most important measure of success in your school? And versus the central office society, we want the principal and the teachers, after looking at their data, hearing what their parents and their teachers say, you decide. It could be reading, it could be math, it could be social studies, it could be discipline. But whatever it is, you've got to be able to measure it. And this thing of, well, our culture needs to improve. Uh, how are you going to measure that? Are you going to measure your culture by what? School safety? Was that going to be measured by out of school suspensions or the number of fights? How are you going to measure this? And what are you going to do different on a daily basis? How are you going to teach students differently? And is your staff development, is it meaningful? Is it going to be continue to be 3-hour staff training or one day in the summer or a summer drive-through workshop? Staff training has to be at least 45 hours of really deeply connected material. We have to remember, we've got to change the behavior and knowledge level of adults before we start tackling that same issue with students. And we don't do that.
You bring up a good point about when you're trying to make some change, all of the variables that you have to go through when you're applying for a job as an aspiring leader, whether it be a superintendent job, cabinet level, and you're making a move. What are some of the things that you do to kind of kick the tires, if you will, on a district, a school board, a community? Is there some tips you can give to some of our young administrators?
I can stop and reflect back almost every superintendency that I applied for and received. Almost every one of them, at some point during the interview, a board member would say, "You know more about us than we know about you." And it's like you said, you need to kick that tire. You need to find out, and you can do that by watching videos of past board meetings. And if more superintendents did that, not only would they probably cry a lot more than they do, they probably would not. They probably would not apply for jobs. But when you want to be a superintendent, sometimes, boy, you just you're kind of full of yourself. You're a bit younger. You think I can do this. I can solve this. I can straighten that out. What we don't recognize sometimes, you need to try to make sure that your beliefs and values as a person can match that of the majority of the Board of Education. And I can remember working for a board, and you talk about racism. I mean, it was rampant among board members, and I didn't find that out until after I got there. And um, I should have known. I should have known, but it was on me. And sometimes what I would say to folks, as hard as it will be, you shouldn't take every job that's offered to you. It needs to be a match. You're not going to make a 9-member board. You're not going to make them change their values and beliefs to match yours. They're going to expect you to get in line with theirs. And if you don't, you're going to struggle to survive.
Yeah, yeah, I learned that firsthand. And if I had a mulligan to give, I would do a lot more digging and research. But I guess you got to have a little bit of delusional confidence when you step into those type of roles as a leader, thinking that you can change it. But you're absolutely right. It was as soon as I realized we were unaligned, I was like, this is just it's just going to happen. It's just a matter of when I'm going to have to pack my bags, just because so divergent in what we believed was in the best interest of students.
One of the hardest things I ever did as superintendent was even in board retreats to try to get the board to come together collectively on what was their top priority that they wanted the district and wanted me to work on to try to achieve. What is the one thing that if we could get better at it would please you the most as a board? And that board back in Guilford County, North Carolina said dropout rate. And we went from about a 16.5% dropout rate to a 2.4% dropout rate over that 8-year period. And while we were becoming poorer and more diverse, but man, would they support our efforts. We introduced the middle college concept there, small schools on, I think we had 7 or 8 of them on college campuses, not in high schools, not building a middle college or early college on the college campus, but actually participating and using their classrooms. It was phenomenal what our team was able to do there. But it was because that board had a singular focus. And I remember after I announced I was retiring in Houston, we went on a retreat. David Thompson, who's the legendary school board attorney there in the Houston area and in Texas in general, fabulous person. David was leading the retreat. And I remember we had, our 9 board members, and he passed out a sheet of paper and he said, look, I'd like for you to get ready to look for another superintendent. Terry's told you, he's 6 months from now, he's retiring. So what would you like for him to start positioning the district? How would you like for him to start positioning the district so that it is in a position to address your top 1 or 2 priorities? So everybody please write down 1 or 2 top priorities, and then we'll fold all the answers together and see what we come up with. Well, we had 9 board members. We had 18 answers. As I recall, 14 of them were so different, there was no way in the world that you could line them up. They just were across the sheet. If the adults that are governing the organization can't come together and identify what are the 1, 2, 3 most important areas, it's tough. It's tough for the leader.
You introduced so many innovative schools and programs in Houston. Give me one story where you kind of came up with the idea, like the idea just hit you. I got to think that you're very well read and keep up with a lot of different aspects of education. So is there one piece where you're like, I kind of got this inspiration and brought it to Houston from either a relationship or just wherever you got it from?
Yeah. So I was kind of at the end of my first year at Houston, and Teach for America was having their big banquet at the Hilton Americas downtown in Houston. And so Nancy and I go. And so before everybody goes inside, in the lobby there are a lot of people milling around and talking. And all of a sudden, this guy walked up to me and he said, hey, you're the new guy, right? And I said, yeah. And he was kind of cocky. I said, yeah, I'm the new guy. Nancy was standing there beside me. And I said, smell like Nancy. And he said, it's good to meet you. My name is Rick Cruz, and I am Teach for America. And I'd heard that crap so many times about I am Teach for America, which I love Teach for America. And I guess it was the way they taught the kids to brand themselves, but it just kind of struck me funny. And I looked right at him. I said, Mr. Cruz, I said, I bet that you've been here, 2 years or 3 years? Well, how'd you know? I said, for all alike, most of you. I said, you've probably been here, you get ready to go back to corporate America, and you're getting ready to leave these kids, right? And he said, well, how'd you know? And I said, well, I'm making assumptions. Apparently, I'm white. I said, tell me a little bit about you. And he said, I'm from Mexico City. He said, I'm a Yale graduate. He said, my father graduated from Harvard and my grandfather from Yale, and they're in the telecommunications business in Mexico. I grew up around Mexico City. I said, well, how did you get into Yale? I mean, I know you're a bright guy, but tell me how you got into Yale. And he just said, well, I went to the America School there, which is it's a school for fluent kids. Used to be an expat kind of school, and it's all over the world now. And he said, but when I got ready to graduate, he said, my parents hired a counselor who met with me on a regular basis. and taught me how to improve my SAT scores and taught me how to interview and taught me how to write letters of application and taught me what college life would be like. And my parents took me around to visit all of these schools. And and it was fascinating because I had just finished going to a lot of graduations in Houston and shaking hands with kids walking across the stage. And Rick, the kids with the Bader Club collars and the honor cords, I would shake hands with those kids, a lot of them kids of color. And I would say, "Where are you going to school? Where are you going to college?" And they would say University of Houston downtown. And they would say University of Houston. Or they would say Houston Community College. You would find less than 5% of those kids saying they were going to tier one or Ivy League schools. And so that hit me. And I kept thinking, whoa, because one thing we learned and one thing counselors need to focus on is that when a child in high school decides to go to college, and this is good for parents as well, look at the graduation rate of the school that your child is getting ready to go to. It makes a huge difference. And Ivy League schools, tier one universities, graduation rates are at 94+%. University of Houston back in that day, they've grown a lot. And it's a much better school today than it was back before Renee became chancellor there. Got a medical school I could go on and on about. I'm really proud of that place. But back then, graduation rate was around 50%. University of Houston downtown was around 12%. Houston Community College was worse than that. So you look at all of that. But so I was coming off of these graduations where these really bright young kids were not going to tier one Ivy League schools. And then here is Cruz right up telling me how he got to go to Yale and how he graduated. And I looked right at him. I said, "Well, Mr. Cruz, why don't you, versus going back, why don't you stay here in Houston and help me create a program for our poor kids to help them get into tier one Ivy League schools?" And he kind of looked and he said, "Well, would you be willing to do that?" I said, "Of course." He said, "Well, how about budget?" I said, "Well, what about $200,000 for year one?" He said, "Well, can I still teach?" I said, "Of course, do this after school, but yeah, well, am I going to get paid to do this?" I said, "No, I want you to stay and do this. Let's see where it goes and let's see what we can build." And so he and a colleague of his started the Immerse program. And the first year, they helped a young gentleman, a young African American, get into Harvard and a young woman get into Tufts. I may have that backwards, but two kids. He got so excited, we increased the funding, and he got 7 kids in. And the following year, I increased the budget to $1 million and encouraged him to come downtown from a fifth grade teacher to an assistant superintendent's job, working on expanding that program across the district. And the rest is history. It's now had it's his own foundation. It's not part of the school district. I believe if I were still there, it would have still been part of the district, but that's philosophical and that's okay. That's an idea that just popped into my head from one person to another person to another person. And I could tell you a dozen other stories like that.
It sounded like you're about to strangle Rick, and then he finally got into the story, and it eventually worked out okay.
Good guy. I mean, so smart, so bright, like Teach for America. I mean, um, we started another program that just popped in our heads. There was, we started paying. We had our bench strength for future principals and assistant principals was gotten pretty weak, and so we started a program at the St. Thomas University where students that we identified are teachers, Teach for America teachers, very bright, very sharp, made up the core of this program. But we paid for them to get their master's degree, and then it was basically a scholarship loan. If you came back and worked with us in administrative capacity once you finished for 3 years, it was paid off. If not, you had to pay us back. It was kind of like a quasi small business loan. But what was different about it was half of the courses came out of the College of Education, and half of the courses came out of the College of Business taught by MBA professors. Very novel idea. I used it in Greensboro, San Diego, and in Houston. Again, an idea that popped up during a conversation with someone.
What's interesting is, and I was remarking to a couple of superintendent friends a few weeks ago, because of the voucher system that has gone live this year in Texas and picking up speed in other states. And I don't think it's going away anytime soon. Matter of fact, I think it will. The governor will increase the spend amount on that within the next 2 years. But I say all that to say, now all of a sudden, school districts need to think in terms of I have to sell my wares, essentially, right? I've got to we're in the sales game, and our students are clients, and they have a lot of different options, and parents have a lot of different options. And it made me think about, when we went to Rice and we were learning how to position our schools, and how valuable that training was then. But like now it is, a lot of our districts don't know how to do that because they've never had to think in terms, your students are dropped in your neighborhood and you get them and you move on about your day. But that ability to kind of see what do you do better than anyone else, and how do you position that as a tease to parents and students, right? And just the value of that. And I'm thinking that there's going to be a lot more of that, or should be a lot more of that, as public schools lose their clients to the privates and the charters here in Texas.
You see me shaking my head because I absolutely agree with you. Uh, but saying there should be and there will be are two different things.
Yeah.
And I'm like you, I don't understand. I was looking this past week at the number of school districts in Texas that have at least one school that has 3 consecutive Fs in a row in that school, and there's over 400 in the state of Texas. And if that school continues to make an F for 5 years, the state will take that district over. I don't think people have quite come to terms with that, or they don't care. It's very, very frustrating. It is hard to understand why people won't make those kinds of decisions. And, it's so interesting. I got a call this past week from a former Houston principal. And it started with a text message and said, would you ever have time to talk? I just want to say thank you. And I picked up the phone and called them back. And it was a principal that had taken an F school and moved it all the way to a B school in 2 years' time. And one of the things that this person said to me was, I want to thank you for the opportunity to have the freedom uh, to lead and to choose what we needed to do. And she thanked me for the work that we had done at Rice University with Vikas Patel, a professor over there in the business department. And it did make a huge difference. And, I told her the story. I said, a lot of times we as leaders don't try to find the who's that can help us. We think we can go it alone. And you were asking me earlier about messages to young superintendents. What I'd say to you is I could offer you more advice than you would ever take. And most of it would fit, a lot of it wouldn't. But, just because your school board tells you to do something doesn't mean they want you to do it. Once you do it and the community comes unglued, they're going to throw you under the bus and often back over you to make sure that you're taken care of. Uh, so you have to be very cautious with that. Um, the other piece is you have to find who's that can help you. You can't do it all alone. And just because you ask for help or coaching or guidance doesn't mean that you don't know what you're doing. I kind of had a coach for the last 25 years. I was a superintendent. It's interesting. All pro athletes, I see Michael Jordan in the background. They're shooting a game winning jump shot. And I guarantee you, Michael had a coach every year. He played basketball from the time he started in middle school until he finished and retired. And they helped him get better. And, yes, he did a lot of it on his own. But yes, those coaches help guide him. Fortune 500 people have coaches. But superintendents sometimes, and a lot of times principals, they don't. What Educentric provides is they provide that coach for that principal that comes in and works with them to help them and their team move forward. Interesting side note too, you mentioned Rice and I mentioned Vikas. Vikas had a really strong relationship with some of our board members. And I can say this without reservation, without his help in helping convince some of those board members to put that bond referendum on the ballot, it would have never made it. And there would have been no new schools. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. Now, he didn't go out and vote. He didn't run the campaign, but if you don't step in the water, if you can't convince somebody to let you step in the water, it's really hard to learn how to swim. So, there was a lot of good who's back there one time. Rollo Fire was a heck of a who when he helped us turn around those Apollo 20 schools. And a lot of what we do in Educentric came from that work. It's someone that, you pull from this and you pull from that, you put a concept together. Um, but again, most of it comes from that Ushan Norton electric work.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but if we can wrap up, I've got some questions from some of our HISD colleagues and we'll just go real quick, just rapid fire. And I promise I won't get me or you in trouble with the questions. If you were drafting, like let's ask, think of it as your MLB draft, right? And you were going to take the top 2 people, educators, to help you lead a district, who would they be?
This is a grand question. It's interesting because in Houston, I could have lined up 25 people and closed my eyes and pointed in any direction, and any one of the 2, I would have been honored to have helping me lead any school district anywhere, anyhow. That would have been just they were that good. And I'm not blowing smoke at you. You fit in that category. You know that. You've heard me recommend you to current superintendents, and you know that's true. Trying to pick out 2 is very, very, very difficult. But there's so many talented ones. 41 of the ones that worked together with us in HISD. Now, some were principals, but they were key principals, and they were people that played key roles. Have gone on to be school superintendents all over the country, leading some of the largest districts in the country. I'll be honest with you, on some of them have been more successful than I thought they would have been, and some that I thought would have really been successful weren't. The problem that you get into in making assumptions about people is the environments they walk into. All of a sudden you walk into, we talked a little bit about this, you walk into political environments, it just makes it, no matter how talented you are, just almost impossible to survive. And
Yeah.
you walk into others. Well, I look at in leadership, I used to say this all the time, it gets me in trouble. When people talk to me about, well, he's such a great leader. And I say, explain to me, you pick out 4 metrics. It can be third grade reading, it can be graduation rate, it can be dropout rate, yeah, it can be 6th grade math scores. I don't care what they are. You pick out 4 metrics about that organization. You tell me what they were the year before that person came there, and you tell me what they are now, and we'll talk about who's a good leader. Because leaders get things done. Leaders help move things forward. Leaders get results. And it's hard. You can be a nice person with a great personality, and people can love you. People can even respect you. Piece I keep coming back to is if you're not working collectively with a governing body like the board that will also share your dreams and aspirations of what that district could be, it makes it really hard to get there from here.
We had a little straw poll going, so we were thinking, all right, he may say 1 or 2 names, and we'll see what happens. But I'll let you take the politically correct. You got to name it. Give me one that you were like, all right, this is just like not in an order or the top one, but just one is like no brainer. If I have to go do this, I'm taking this person.
Gosh, if I had to go, I'd take you. If they would go, I'd take Aaron Spence, who's a superintendent up in New York. He's quite good. I look at the job that Martha has done in Tomball. The key to it is, I think, is you pick people. You have to, number one, the key to your answer is I don't care about political correctness. You know that. It doesn't bother me. I don't try hard not to hurt people's feelings, but that's going to happen. But what you have to do is assess what needs to be done. If you've got to have a great communications department, you pick Aggie Alves. Every day, all day, Aggie Alves. She's as good as it comes. Or there's a person I work with in Greensboro, North Carolina, Sonia Conway. Pick her every time. She and Aggie would be woo, but she's special. But you go down the list and you start thinking, okay, what do I need done? And who would be the best person to get that done? And that's one thing you look at these takeover districts in Texas, where you come in as a new superintendent and you have the opportunity to do that. You don't worry about the political ramifications. You just go do it. That's much different than when you come into an organization and you recognize, well, I got some people on this cabinet. They're very talented. And then I got some people on this cabinet that I probably wouldn't have hired. Now,
Yeah.
how do I spend my time? Do I spend my time trying to coach these people up? And I know in Houston, I had one or two people on my cabinet there that it didn't matter how hard you coached or what you tried to do. They were going to work so hard. They weren't very loyal. They carried information out of our meetings and gave it to bloggers, and they gave it to board members. And, you know, what's fascinating is I don't have to call names. Heck, if you were there, you know who they are. Everybody did. So, calling names does not much good. But, we had an awful lot of very talented people. And you got people like, let's take Mark Bedell. Mark Bedell, when I worked in Houston, he was a high school principal at Booker T. Washington. And you could tell Mark had the soul for it. You could tell he had the vision, he had the beliefs. But I never got to work closely enough with Mark at the central office to have ever been able to predict that he would be where he is now, leading one of the largest school districts, if not the largest districts in Maryland, and doing it very well.
Yep. Who would you say that you almost had to fire, but it worked out all right?
Probably a guy named Rick Fernandez.
Only a few times. Yeah. You never knew. We were like when you had to have a conversation. I was like, all right, what did I start going? What did I do? And here was the magic. Yes, sir. I screwed that up. I know I screwed it up. I'll fix it. Won't happen again. I knew that was like, if you screwed up, just say you screwed up and move on down the road.
That was so easy. And some people made it so hard. I had a situation one time where I had two central office administrators. We were having some conflict in a community, and it was over principal selection. And the community gotten upset, and there was a community meeting, and people were angry, and I couldn't go. I had another conflict I really couldn't get out of. I couldn't go. So I sent two of my central office administrators, high level, to go to the meeting, take notes, listen to see what was happening. And they basically came back and lied. And I knew they were lying because I knew somebody that was there. I asked them, well, what did they say? How did they conduct themselves? They said, what do you mean they didn't come? I said, are you sure? No, they didn't show up. They got afraid and sat in the car in the parking lot. And I know those kind of things happen. And so when I brought them in and I started asking, and they started telling me about what was happening. I said, well, I find this interesting because I've asked several people and they said that you didn't go inside, you sat in the car in the parking lot. And they just flushed. And they started stuttering and stammering. And I said, look, here's the thing. All you had to say is, I didn't go inside. And I was afraid, or we just didn't want to go. Just tell the truth. And we'll get, I said, we're going to get past this. I said, but I can tell you right now, next time this happens will be the last time. Everybody gets,
Yeah.
I understand people getting afraid, but I promise you, this doesn't bode well. And that, I didn't call any names. I didn't call any situations, but that actually happened.
Okay. True or false? Do you remember the big meeting? I think it was early in the fall. And I say early, probably, I think November. I remember being a rookie principal, and there were our school support officers were all part of the meeting. And you came in and had a couple of words, but essentially said, I've got about $4 million worth of salary in this room. And I don't know what for, because I'm about to save all 4 million and fire all y'all. You were talking to the school support officers because they weren't on campus enough helping some of your principals. Do you remember that happening?
I don't. That was probably wildly exaggerated by someone that you probably drank a lot of beer with, if I had to guess.
I was there. I was like, I don't think I want to go to central office. That's not a good place to be.
Well, I don't remember saying it, but it sounds familiar. So maybe could have happened. I know that sometimes in leadership roles, you get very frustrated. And I know often I did. And I learned a lot of lessons. It doesn't do a lot of good to threaten people. People that you have to threaten, really, you should fire. I
Yep.
believe that. If you've got to threaten somebody to get them motivated, to get them to do their job, you don't need them. They don't need to be there. They need to be somewhere selling insurance or doing something else. One of the things that I honestly believe is there is one of the real issues in education is a lack of urgency. How long do you want kids to go without knowing how to read? Um, that sense of urgency and that sense of good is good enough. There's nothing wrong with having C schools. I had a superintendent tell me that last week. He said, I don't have any failing schools. I said, do you have any D or C schools in your district? Oh yeah. Uh, but C schools are fine. I don't get any pushback for C schools. And then I just said, let me ask you one quick question. Would you want your children to go to a C school?
Yeah.
And well, my child doesn't have to go to a C school. And it goes back to, I keep talking Madeline Hunter. Madeline used to say, you should want for every child what you want for your child. And so this whole sense, you learn a lot. Heck, I made more mistakes than I got more wrong than I got right. But you learn a lot of things, and you can say things like, God, I should fire every one of you because you aren't doing anything, sitting around here looking at each other. You need to be out in schools, and yeah, I'm not sure that I don't think I ever fired anyone for not being out in schools. Well, maybe one person.
Uh, yeah, no, obviously, there's a lot of great stories there, and we can't really share all of them on the air, but I really appreciate your time and just sharing a little bit about just your career, your perspective on leadership, some of the things that you were able to do in all of the school districts. But obviously HISD is very special to me, and it really shaped my career and my beliefs about what is really possible for students. I'll take that with me for the rest of my life, is understanding that if people want it bad enough, there's a way to get it done. It's just
I've always believed, people will lead different ways. I believed in hiring good people. I believed it was absolutely the school board and the superintendent's right to set direction and determine what needed to be done. The how, I always believed, should be left up to the school level and the principal. Central office should be a support mechanism to support what you're trying to do out in your schools, not a group of people that felt like they've earned the right to be downtown and that they earned the right to go out and try to tell you what to do and how to run your school. Uh, that made little sense to me, but I know some people do that and get good results with it. It just wasn't the way that I thought you should operate.
Yep, 100%. Well, if school districts are needing some support through Educentric, is there a preferred method of outreach or contact, or is there anything that we can share with some of the folks that may be watching and listening?
Sure. They can go to our website, www.educentric.org, and there's contact information there for me and others that do work. We're passionate about our work. We're in 8 states now, and we're growing, and we get frustrated. I get frustrated dealing with people trying to talk to them about, hey, we can help you improve your school. We are having some phenomenal results. I know in Texas alone last year, we moved a number of schools from F schools to C schools and B schools, D schools to C schools and B schools. I know in another state, we moved a graduation rate in 1 year from 69 to 91%. Uh, we're a big district in Virginia right now, um, where second quarter formative assessments or benchmark scores are up 28 points in those schools compared to a year ago. Those Title I schools are now outperforming non-Title I schools. The model works. Uh, it works if you've got a good leader that will
Yeah.
stay focused and keep people focused on what matters most. Um, that's important. And, it's an exciting time to be in education. It's a hard time to be in education. People complain a lot about budget cuts. Yet I can go back and look at your budget today in your school, and I can tell you what's important to you based on how you spend your money. And when you spend your money wide and spread it out, nothing's important to you. If you're focused, you have to spend your money. And the big question I ask often is, every initiative you have in your school, why do you have it? When did you implement it? What does it cost? And more importantly, is it helping you reach your goal? And if it is, you should keep it. If it's not, you should consider pausing it or should pause it and consolidate your dollars and your resources and your time and your energy. If your kids can't read, why do you only have a 60-minute reading log? It's like you said earlier, going back, where's the common sense into all this?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what we're here for. Hopefully to spread a little goodwill, a little bit of education, and also to help schools. So I appreciate your time today. I kept you longer than I meant to, but it's always a pleasure to talk to you, learn from you, laugh a little bit, and share some perspective. I'm sure some of our former colleagues will enjoy seeing this episode.
I should have asked you, put you on the spot, and said you kind of had a straw poll about who were the one or two people I would have kept. I'd like to know who were the high winners in that group with you.
Well, it kills me to admit it, but yes, Bedell was one of them that was kind of a consensus. There was a couple of Aaron Spences, although I never got to work with Aaron, but always heard great things about him. And I'm trying to think there was one else. I'd have to go through my phone to find it, but was rising to the top. And I cannot remember.
Yeah,
but I remember.
Yeah, you could go on and on and on. And what's so wonderful is a lot of the ones that were very successful are running smaller districts and being very successful at impacting children's lives. And then you get others like Aaron and Mark that are running big districts. But leadership's leadership. All children, regardless of who they are or where they're located, are entitled to a good education. And that usually happens where you've got a school board and a superintendent who are working together, focused on the same things and wanting the same things and are willing to change. Question in closing, a big question for every principal in this country is, what are we doing in my school today that's different than what we did last year, last month? What are we doing differently? It could be a different curriculum. It could be a different tutorial. But you love athletics. Your daughter's a heck of a basketball player from what I hear. But and I know too, that you don't keep doing the same things the same way. Your skill set will go up, but then it'll peak. And then you got to do something else and it'll peak. People will see that guy in that background there shooting that jump shot to win that game. They have no idea the countless hours he spent in the gymnasium of shooting and in the weight room lifting weights, and other people were out drinking beer and going to parties.
That's nobody shows you the blood, sweat, and tears that it takes to get the success, right? That's all part of the mystery of it. So no, I couldn't agree more. Well, I will let you go, Dr. Grier. Thank you for joining us on the show, and for all of those out there listeners, and subscribe, share, click the little button on the like, and thank you for joining Solve for X.
Hey, thank you. Take care, Rick.
Thanks for joining us on Solve for X. Please follow, like, and subscribe for more episodes. And until next time, keep asking the right questions and solving for X.